Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin. Two great guests, General Jack Keane and Jim Trusty. We've got a lot of territory to cover. I'm glad you're here. You hear this phrase, due process, all the time. It's in the Fifth Amendment. It's in the 14th Amendment. It's in the 14th Amendment to apply the Fifth Amendment to the states. Due process. We all believe in due process, don't we? What does that mean? Where does it come from? When did it start? You've got a lot of talking heads, some of whom are lawyers, most of whom are not, who keep telling you that illegal aliens, particularly criminals, particularly MS-13 wife-beater types, have a right to due process. It's amazing. One judge says so. Another judge says that 530,000 illegal aliens who were illegally brought here in violation of our parole rules by Joe Biden with an executive order, each and every one of them has a right to due process. Where does that come from? What happens if somebody steps over our border or puts their toe in our water? Do they have a right to due process too? Gets a little more complicated, doesn't it? But notice, all the commentators and all the experts don't explain it. Where does due process begin? Where does it end? How does it apply? You know why they don't explain it? Because they don't know. And you know why they don't know? Because the Supreme Court is all over the map. And you know why the Supreme Court's all over the map? Because the truth is, it is setting policy. No, Mark, you don't understand. It's interpreting the Constitution. I understand the Constitution. I understand the men who wrote it, and I understand the men who ratified it. The Bill of Rights came after. It came in the first Congress. It was adopted by supermajorities in both houses, 12 of them, sent to the states, ratified by a super-duper majority of 3/4 of the state legislatures, and they reduced it to 10. That's our Bill of Rights. But where does the Constitution state, or the Bill of Rights for that matter, that the Supreme Court decides what's due process? Well, Mark, somebody has to decide. Do you know what your framers of the Constitution said? You know what the ratifiers at the state convention said? They said, stay in your lane. It's a phrase I use all the time. So the executive will decide due process when it comes to executive decision makings. Congress can pass laws related to due process, but the court doesn't get to make policy when it comes to due process. But Marbury versus Madison, 1803. I didn't ask you about Marbury versus Madison or any Supreme Court ruling where the court has seized policy-making power for itself. The original Constitution, the original constitutional debates, the original state debates, what did they decide? They decided that the executive branch would run the executive branch. They decided that the Supreme Court and what other courts Congress create runs the courts, and Congress runs the Congress. The Supreme Court doesn't just have power to make decisions all the time, all over the map, anytime it wants. And so this is why we have a problem right now. Who's going to decide what due process means? The court? Is the court now a political Politburo? Now let's look at some of the things the U.S. Supreme Court have done on this issue of aliens and due process. First, we look at the Constitution. We look at the Fifth Amendment. And the relevant part, no person shall be held or be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And so what you're hearing day in and day out by some people who should know better, some people who don't know better, that means due process under the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment applies to illegal aliens. What kind of due process? What do you mean by that? Full civilian U.S. citizen due process? What does that mean? The left knows what it means. That's what the left wants. Not because they give a damn about any illegal immigrant. They use the illegal immigrants, and they've used them all along. No, it's because they're trying to change the country. Revolution by immigration. That's why they opened the border. The Supreme Court has suggested that the extent of due process for aliens present in the United States, and there are many sources for this, this is constitution.congress/gov, quote, may vary depending upon the alien status or circumstance. So, due process isn't chiseled into stone. It just depends. For instance, at times the court has indicated that at least some of the constitutional protections to which an alien is entitled may turn upon whether the alien has been admitted into the United States or developed substantial ties to our country. Thus, there's some uncertainty regarding the extent to which due process considerations constrain Congress's exercise of its immigration power with respect to aliens within the United States. Uh-oh. That sounds a little confusing. Well, we have a case, 2001 Supreme Court, Zagvias versus David. The court construed a statute authorizing detention of aliens with final orders of removal as having implicit temporal limitations. Wow, what does all that mean? There's certain limitations to it. According to the court, construing the statute in a manner that would allow the indefinite detention of lawfully admitted aliens who've been ordered removed would raise serious constitutional concerns. In the court's view, because aliens within the United States are protected by due process, Congress must give a clear indication of an intent to authorize the indefinite detention of removable aliens. Justice Antonin Scalia wrote a dissent in that case, as did Anthony Kennedy. But Scalia said, why? What do you mean they can't be kept indefinitely? Of course they can, unless Congress says otherwise. Why are we, the Supreme Court, making that determination, number one? And number two, it's just not our area, and it's Congress's area. Wow, he must have been a radical. In Denmore versus Kim, 2003, the Supreme Court held that the mandatory detention during the pendency of formal removal proceedings of certain aliens who had committed specific crimes was constitutionally permissible. Uh-oh, now I'm getting confused. So, the pendency of formal removal proceedings of certain aliens who had committed specific crimes was constitutionally permissible. So what's the deadline on that? Can they be kept indefinitely? Apparently so. Wow. Excuse me, it's confusing. In 2018, the Supreme Court in Jennings versus Rodriguez, they held that the statutes were textually clear in mandating or authorizing the detention of certain aliens during the removal proceedings, and that nothing in those provisions limited the length of detention or required periodic bond hearings. Whoa. They could be held forever? Apparently so. Having a due process. Then we have a 2020 decision, Department of Homeland Security versus, I'll give it a best shot, Thurisigium. That held that an alien detained shortly after entering the United States, he got into the United States about 25 feet, could not constitutionally challenge a federal statute limiting judicial review of his expedited removal. Congress has passed a law and said, you know what, Congress, you know what, Supreme Court, you stay out of this. You stay out of this. We'll handle this. And so they said, look, this statute limiting judicial review of his expedited removal, they grabbed him and they threw him out. Those proceedings, a streamlined removal process applicable to aliens apprehended at or near the border. Although the alien had physically entered the United States, the court determined that he could be treated for due process purposes as if he stopped at the border, because he was encountered only 25 yards inside the United States and essentially remained on the threshold of entry. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the court going to do here? They're going to take 1,000 situations and have 1,000 different standards for due process, or not? That's the problem when you have a court turning into a Politburo, into a super legislature, or into the executive branch making all these decisions. All these are 9 lawyers, 3 of whom are radical left-wing kooks, 2 of whom aren't sure what they are, and the others who are pretty solid, especially Alito and Thomas. So why are they making all these decisions? Do they have a better idea, more wisdom, more judgment on making these decisions? Of course not. But here we are. The Supreme Court's jurisprudence indicates that although aliens present within the United States generally have due process protections, the extent of those constitutional protections may depend on certain factors, including whether the alien has been lawfully admitted or developed ties to the United States, whether the alien has engaged in specified criminal activity, how long they've been in the United States, and a long list of other things. Therefore, even with regard to aliens present within the United States, the court has sometimes deferred to Congress's policy judgments that limit the ability of some classes of aliens to contest their detention or removal. Does that clear things up for you, Mr. Producer? It shouldn't. The Supreme Court has not ruled on, 1, due process relating to the mass importation of aliens under Biden. Flew them in here, 530,000 of them, by executive order. And what rights, if any, applied to each and every one of those 530,000? A federal district judge has decided they get full due process rights. Do you know what that means, effectively? That means amnesty. So Biden breaks the law, the parole law under immigration laws, uses executive order, literally solicits and brings in over 500,000 aliens, illegal aliens, gives them a 2-year right to be in the United States. President Trump comes in and says, nah, you're out of here. And the court, no. Due process. Who says? The judge. Based on what? If due process rights do apply to those 530,000, I'll go further. If due process applies to the 21 million illegal aliens, what exactly are we talking about? What kind of due process? 1,000 different types of due process? Depending if somebody's standing on their head or doing 12 push-ups? What is it? And how will this be administered, America? We have a backlog of 1.5 million cases already in front of these administrative law immigration judges. The vast majority of illegal aliens don't show up. And so there's an order that they're to be deported. Okay, so what? We can't find them. Where are they? We don't have enough personnel for that. Isn't that the point? Isn't that the point of what Biden and the Democrats have done and what the media want to do? They've collapsed the system. Now they wave around the Constitution, due process, because they know the impossibility of applying full due process to everybody. Well, what about partial due process? Well, partial due process, is that due process? What about those who lie in their applications to get into the United States? Like on student visas. What about them? Oh, no, they have free speech rights. They're like Rosa Parks, you know. Just because they want the annihilation of the Jews, just because they support violent, riotous activity on campuses, just because they are a front for Hamas and other terrorist groups, doesn't mean they don't have a right to free speech, you know. What about those people who come here who are violent? International gang members. You know, like the ones that were sent back or sent to El Salvador. What are their due process rights? Do you know the ACLU or some group wanted to treat them as a class action, you know. And they need to be given notice. You see, this is what happens when eggheads in robes take over. You're going to give hundreds of international terrorist gangbangers from Venezuela sent here by that government notice? Oh, yes. And when you give them notice, what will they do? Goodbye. They'll disappear into the population. This is anarchy that they're proposing. This isn't about due process. It's not about due process at all. What about those who are advocates of terrorism, as I said? Well, we already know what the Democrats think, don't they? They visit them and they want to make sure they're taken care of. They live in these hellish conditions, you know. That's what the squad is telling us, and so forth and so on. The Democrat Party, as I wrote my book, hates this country. This is revolution by immigration. That's what it is. Tens of millions of people coming into this country who cannot possibly assimilate it into the country. And they don't want them assimilated into the country. You go through our public schools today, they don't teach Americanism, the Pledge of Allegiance, the grand founding fathers, and all the rest of it. You have to assimilate people into your culture, into your society. There's none of that going on. So the problem we now have is a president can change the entire nature of our citizenship, our civil society, or our culture, as Biden did, by lawlessly defying immigration laws to the tune of tens of millions of illegal aliens entering the country in such numbers they cannot assimilate into the country, and the people who want the open borders don't even want them to assimilate into our country. As I said, it's revolution by immigration. And this includes thousands of aliens who seek the destruction, overthrow, and disruption of our country. You see it on our college campuses. They're sent here by their governments. or they come here and they participate. It includes criminals. It includes gang members. It includes spies. They're all supposed to get full due process. That's what the left is arguing. That's what these trial judges are arguing. That's what the media are arguing. The Supreme Court's still trying to figure out what to do as our policy Politburo, rather than put the hammer down on these judges. The Supreme Court has a mixed record right now of participating in this and not participating in this. It's almost like Sybil with 23 personalities, even though there's only 9 justices. So we have de facto massive amnesty. That's what's being attempted here. We're going to have birthright citizenship for those who are born here from the millions of people who are illegal aliens who were brought here. I have little confidence in this court to do the right thing on birthright citizenship. If they follow the Constitution, they will. And I pray they do. But there's one other thing nobody's talking about. Chain migration. Uh-oh is right. Tens of millions of illegal aliens. They have children. Ooh, you're a citizen. Citizen gets old enough, says, you know what? I want to bring my 27 relatives from Honduras, from Switzerland, from the Congo, from Syria. I want to bring them into the country too. Well, by all means. We're talking about 100 million, 150 million people into this country who are foreigners, who are not assimilating into our culture, and it will destroy the United States. It will destroy the United States. I'm not the only one to say this. Many liberals have said this. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., big leftist, the late professor, was an advisor to Kennedy, less so to Johnson, but nonetheless. And he wrote a book called This Uniting of America. And he talks about this sort of thing. Samuel Huntington, a great professor from Harvard at one point, he writes about this. I've written about this. This is exactly what's taking place. This is how you destroy America. And they seek to destroy America. There's no question about it. But I do have a question for all the hypocrites out there in the Democrat Party, in the media, and in their front groups. How come you didn't complain about Biden? What are you talking about? It just takes a little bit of research, ladies and gentlemen. The UCLA, that's not my school. That's a whack job university at this point. Their law school. Here we have from June 22nd, 2023. Last time I checked, Biden was president. Gross miscarriages of justice continue 2 years into Biden administration's fast-track court program for families seeking asylum. Oh, do tell. 2 years ago, the Biden administration launched the dedicated docket. And what happened? What happened was, ladies and gentlemen, 70% of those on the docket in Los Angeles didn't have attorneys, but they had due process. The court says they don't have to have attorneys. 72.4% of the deportation orders were issued in absentia, meaning the immigrant families never had their day in court. Almost 50% of absentia deportation orders were against children, 2/3 of whom were age 6 and under. Gee willikers, I don't remember hearing anything about due process, do you? No. I don't remember hearing a damn thing about it. The Biden administration says UCLA Law School has continued to double down on prioritizing expediency over fairness, fast-tracking families through removable proceedings without legal representation. They said he violated due process. So furious was the UCLA Law School, they issued another report, and this one was in December 2023. A damning new report released today by the Center for Immigration Law and Policy, UCLA Law, finds the Biden administration has failed children in immigration court under its watch. Despite taking important steps in early days, the report details how the administration's policies have led to grave injustices of children facing immigration court proceedings in the United States and resulted in tens of thousands of children ordered deported, most without legal representation. They said no due process. Where was the ACLU? Where was Norm Eisen? Where was Mark Elias? Where were all these frauds and phonies and fakes? Where were all these fantastic radical left-wing Democrat judges? 5- and 6-year-olds being deported, they didn't have lawyers? What kind of due process is this? Oh my goodness. For the first 100 years in this country, there was no such thing as due process with immigrants, let alone illegal immigrants. And so piece by piece, by piece by piece, the Supreme Court's making up the laws as it goes along, even though really originally it didn't have such authority. And it's all intended to change the country forever and to destroy President Trump's agenda. We need to push back. And Congress, it really would be kind of cool if you woke the hell up and helped do something about this, because you do have the power, you know. We'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.